He walked into the hotel he built, and they threw him out into the rain. 35 years, a stolen deed, a jury that was paid, a name erased from every record like it never existed. He didn't fight back, didn't raise his voice, didn't beg. He just picked up a pen and started writing everything down, because patience isn't waiting. Patience is preparing for the moment they stop believing you're a threat. That moment is now. The rain came down hard that night. Not the gentle kind that makes you want to sit by a window. This was the other kind, the kind that soaks through everything. Through your coat, through your shoes, through whatever's left of your dignity. Elijah Cross walked through it like he'd been walking through worse things his whole life. Because he was 71 years old, and he moved like he was 50. The bag over his shoulder was old burlap, worn smooth in the places his hand gripped it most. It wasn't heavy, but he carried it like it was, like it held something that couldn't be replaced, because it did. The Crestwood Grand rose up ahead of him through the curtain of rain. 42 stories of glass and stone and light, the kind of building that announces itself from 6 blocks away. It made ordinary people feel small just by his existing. Elijah didn't feel small. He stopped at the corner across the street, stood there in the downpour, looking up at those lit windows, at the brass letters above the entrance, at the doorman under the canopy stamping his feet against the cold. Then he crossed the street. The automatic doors slid open. Cold air rushed in. Rain smell, and Elijah Cross stepped through into the lobby of the Crestwood Grand for the first time in 35 years. The lobby was the kind of place designed to make you feel underdressed even in your best clothes. Marble floors the color of cream. Chandeliers hanging like frozen waterfalls. A string quartet in the corner playing something nobody was actually listening to. Guest in evening wear drifting between the bar and the front lounge, glasses in hand, voices low and practiced. The automatic doors slid shut behind him. The lobby didn't go quiet all at once. It went quiet in waves. The way a stone dropped in, still water ripples outward. First the doorman, then the couple nearest the entrance, then the front desk clerk, a young woman with perfect posture and a practiced smile that faltered at the edges. Nobody said anything. They just looked. At his coat, which was clean but thin and old. At his boots, which had seen 10,000 miles of pavement. At the burlap bag. At the water dripping from the brim of his hat onto that cream-colored marble floor. Elijah didn't look at any of them. His eyes moved around the lobby slowly, deliberately, the way a man looks at something that belongs to him after a very long time away. The front desk clerk straightened up, cleared her throat, put the smile back on. "Sir," her voice was careful, "can I help you?" Elijah walked forward. "Sir, I'm going to need you to." He reached the front desk, set his bag down on the floor beside his feet, and from inside his coat he took out a folded piece of paper. He placed it on the counter, flat, deliberate, like a man playing a card he'd been holding for years. "Check your property records," he said. His voice was deep, unhurried, the kind of voice that had learned not to waste itself on people who weren't ready to listen. "My name is Elijah Cross. This hotel was built on land that belongs to me." The clerk stared at the paper, then at him, then back at the paper. The lobby had gone completely quiet now. From across the room, the head of guest services, a compact man named Devin Marsh, who'd worked at Crestwood Grand for 11 years, and had developed a finely tuned instinct for situations that needed managing quickly, started moving toward the desk. He was already reaching for his radio. Camille Brooks was behind the second desk by a computer monitor when it happened. She was 28 years old, which was just young enough to still believe things could change, and old enough to know they usually didn't. She'd grown up 12 blocks south of where this hotel now stood, in a neighborhood that had been gutted over the course of her childhood, one boarded-up storefront at a time. She'd watched her mother work 2 jobs for 20 years and still never quite get ahead. She knew what it looked like when a system told someone they didn't belong somewhere. She'd seen that look on her mother's face, on her uncle's face, and to the faces of neighbors, and the rents went again, and the notices went out. So when the tall man in the old coat walked through those doors and the lobby went quiet, Camille didn't look away. She watched. She saw Marsh coming across the lobby, saw him take in the situation in 2 seconds, saw the decision form behind his eyes before he'd even opened his mouth. "Sir." Marsh reached the desk. His voice was smooth, professional. Careful in the way that professional people can be careful when they want to remove someone without technically doing anything wrong. I'm going to have to ask you to. I heard her, Elijah said. He didn't look at Marsh. Still looking straight ahead. I'm not done. Marsh paused, just for the beat. Sir, this is a private establishment, and if you don't have a reservation, I have something better than a reservation. Elijah tapped the paper on the counter once with 2 fingers. I have a deed. The word landed differently than anything else he'd said. Deed. Even the clerk looked up. Marsh recovered fast. He picked up the paper, unfolded it, glanced at it with the quick dismissiveness of a man who'd already decided what it was before he read a single word. Then he folded it back up. And he did something that Camille watched and would not forget for the rest of her life. He dropped it in the trash. Security, he said quietly into his radio. Elijah's eyes moved to the trash can, then back to Marsh. His expression shifted, slight, almost nothing, not surprise. He'd been expecting exactly this. You're making a mistake, he said. Sir, please don't make this difficult. 2 security guards appeared from the side corridor. Big men, professional bearing. They'd done this before. Elijah didn't fight, didn't raise his voice, didn't shift his weight. He just looked at Marsh for one long moment. You won't be laughing long, he said, quietly, almost gently, and then they walked him out. Camille moved without thinking. She waited until Marsh turned away, until the lobby noise started up again, and people went back to pretending they hadn't seen what they'd seen. Then she reached under the desk and tilted the trash toward her. The paper was right on top. She pulled it out, smoothed it flat with her palms, and read it. It was a photocopy. Old. The original document had clearly been folded and unfolded 100 times. The text was formal, legal language, dated 1976. Property description, signatures, 2 names at the bottom. Walter Crestwood and Elijah Cross, co-owners. Camille read it twice. Then a 3rd time. She looked up at the lobby, at the chandeliers, at the marble floor, at the brass letters above the entrance. She'd walked past 5 days a week for 2 years. Then she folded the paper carefully and put it in her jacket pocket. Darnell Sosay had seen the whole thing from the service hallway. He was 26 years old, worked prep in the kitchen, and had a habit of pulling out his phone at moments that other people had already decided weren't worth recording. He'd learned early that the moments people tried to move past quickly were exactly the ones worth keeping. He'd had his phone out before the security guards even reached Elijah. He kept shooting until the doors closed. Then he stood in the hallway for a minute, scrolling back through what he'd captured. The man being walked out, the set of his shoulders, the way he'd looked back at Marsh before the doors shut, and that paper in the trash. Darnell typed out his text, sent it to Camille, who he knew from the 2-minute overlap in their break schedules every Wednesday. You see what just happened? Her reply came back in 30 seconds. I saw it. I have the paper, he sent back. I have video. A pause. Then, don't send that to anyone yet. Carl Booker was 67 years old and had worked at the Crestwood Grand since 1986. That was 38 years. Longer than her current general manager had been alive. Longer than half the staff had been in this city. Longer than most things in this building had existed in their current form. He'd started as a janitor, moved to maintenance, spent the last 16 years as night security for the lower levels, the parking structure, then the basement archives, the parts of the building that nobody thought about unless something went wrong. He'd watched 3 generations of Crestwood come through those doors. He'd watched the building go up, watch it change, watch certain things disappear from certain records around 1990 that he'd noticed but never said anything about. Not because he didn't know, but because he has understood, with the clarity of a man who has nothing to lose and everything to observe, that there's a right time for things, and the time had never been right. When Elijah Cross walked through those doors, Carl saw him from his post at the end of the corridor. He went very still. 48 years since he'd last seen that man, and he still walked the same way, still had those same eyes. Carl didn't move toward him, didn't call out, didn't do any of the things that would have attracted attention. He just watched Marsh handle it the way Marsh handled things, watched the security guys do what they were told, watched doors close. Then Carl went downstairs, unlocked the side service entrance on the north alley, the one the kitchen staff used for deliveries, the one that didn't have a camera facing it directly, left it unlocked, and went back to his post. The alley behind Crestwood was 2 blocks north and 1 block east. Camille didn't know if she'd find him there. She didn't know where else to look. She'd asked the man who sold newspapers on the corner because she'd seen him talking to people who slept rough in the neighborhood. And he'd tilted his head south and said, "Tall fella, quiet, has a bag. Sometimes sits in the alley off Clement, the one behind the pawn shop." So she went there. It was still raining. Her umbrella was mostly decorative at this point, the kind that inverts in a stiff whoosh and spends most of its life in the defensive position. She turned a corner, saw the alley, and stopped. He was there, sitting on a flattened cardboard box under the overhang of a loading dock. Dry, barely, back straight, hands resting on his knees, the burlap bag on the ground beside him. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting there, looking at the wall across from him like it owed him something. Camille took a breath, walked forward. He didn't move until she was about 10 feet away, then he looked up. No surprise in his face, like he'd been expecting this, just not expecting her specifically. "You work at the desk," he said. "Left side, second position. You noticed that. I notice things." She stopped about 4 feet away, close enough to talk, far enough to be respectful. "My name is Camille Brooks. I work at Crestwood Grand." "I know. You already said that part." She almost smiled. Almost. "I have your paper." His expression shifted. Still not surprise, but something. You kept it." Marsh threw it away. "I know. I watched him do it. I pulled it out of the trash." He looked at her for a long moment. Really looked. The way people rarely look at each other anymore, because it takes something out of you to actually see someone. "Why?" he asked. Camille thought about that for a second. "Because I grew up in this city," she said. "I know what it looks like when something's been taken from someone. And I know what it looks like when the people who took it act like they never heard your name." Silence. Rain on the roof of the loading dock. Somewhere in the distance, a car alarm going off and then stopping. "Sit down," he said. "If you want to hear it." His name was Elijah Cross, and he had been born in 1953 in a city that had not yet decided whether men who looked like him were entitled to own anything in it. His father had driven a bus. His mother had done alterations out of their kitchen. They had put 3 kids through school on what they made, which was not an accident. It was a decision made every single day, quietly, without celebration. Elijah had been the middle child, the one who asked the most questions, the one who spent his teenage years watching how money moved through a city and noticing with a precision that surprised even him that it didn't move the same way for everyone. He'd gone to college, studied business and real estate, graduated in 1975 into a city that was beginning, very slowly, to crack open just slightly for men like him, and in that small opening, Elijah Cross had built something. He was good. Not lucky, good. He understood value, understood how neighborhoods changed, how land appreciated, which streets were 5 years away from being somewhere people wanted to be. He'd built a portfolio of small properties by 1975. Nothing dramatic, but real his. And then he'd met Walter Crestwood. Walter was 40 years old in 1975, already running his family's property management company, already well-connected, already the kind of man whose name opened doors in a city where certain doors were still weight-bearing in terms of what you could and couldn't build. He needed capital for a major project, a hotel. 40 floors on a piece of land that sat on what he believed was about to become the most valuable corner in that part of the city. He was right about the land, he was right about the timing, and he needed Elijah Cross, not because he liked him, not because he had overcome 40 years of living inside a particular set of assumptions about who was entitled to build things in this city. He needed him because Elijah had the capital Walter was short, and because Elijah had something else, something Walter couldn't replicate no matter how many doors his name opened. Vision. Elijah had already seen what the building should be. Had already worked out the design logic, the target demographic, the positioning, the detail that would make it different from every other luxury hotel that had gone up in that era. They signed the partnership agreement in February 1976. Equal partners, equal ownership, both names on the deed. The groundbreaking was in April. There was a photograph from that day, a newspaper photo. 2 men in hard hats standing in front of a grass fence with the cleared lot behind them. Walter Crestwood on the left, Elijah Cross on the right, both of them looking at the camera. Walter was smiling the smile of a man who had made a good deal. Elijah was smiling the smile of a man who had built something that couldn't be taken away. He had been wrong about that part. The hotel opened in 1979. For 10 years, it was exactly what Elijah had envisioned. Successful, respected, a landmark. His name was on the letterhead at the board meetings, in the industry publications that covered the property sector in that part of the country. He bought a house, married a woman named Ruth in 1980. Naomi, his daughter from before the marriage, had been born in 1969 and grew up mostly with her mother. But she visited. She knew her father was building something real. Things were good. Then they weren't. Elijah still wasn't sure exactly when Walter had decided. He'd had years to think about it. Years sitting in a cell, and then years sitting on sidewalks, turning it over and over until the edges of it were smooth. The best he could figure was that it had happened somewhere around 1985. The hotel was worth significantly more than it had been in 1976. The neighborhood had done exactly what Elijah predicted it would do. And Walter, who had spent 10 years watching his black business partner be taken seriously, be respected, be written about, and invited to things, had arrived at a place in himself where he could no longer tolerate that. It wasn't just about money. It was about something smaller and uglier than money. It was about the fact that Elijah Cross had been right. Walter hired a private investigator in 1986. Elijah found this out later, much later, from a source he couldn't use in court. The investigator had followed him for 9 months. Looking for anything, there was nothing to find. So Walter made something. It took planning. It took the right people willing to do the right things for the right amount of money. Forged financial records. Manipulated transaction histories. A paper trail that showed, very convincingly to anyone who didn't look too carefully, that Elijah Cross had been systematically embezzling from the joint accounts for years. The police came at 2 in the morning on a Wednesday in March 1989. Elijah was asleep when they knocked. He remembered the sound of it, the weight of a knock like that, the kind that doesn't sound like a question. He'd opened the door in his robe. 4 officers, 2 in suits. Ruth was standing at the top of the stairs. She'd heard them coming. She was holding her robe closed with one hand and looking at him the way a person looks when they understand that something is ending and don't yet know what comes next. Naomi was home that week, 20 years old, winter break from her 2nd year at college. She came to the top of the stairs next to her mother and watched them put the handcuffs on her father. He'd looked back at them once going out the door. He hadn't been able to read Ruth's face, hadn't been able to tell if she believed them or not. He found out later that she had. The trial took 6 weeks. His lawyer was assigned by the court, a young man who worked hard and did everything right, and was simply operating inside a system that had already made its decision before the jury was seated. The jury saw the financial records, the expert testimony, the case that had been constructed with extraordinary care by men who knew how to construct cases. They saw Elijah Cross, and they made the decision that had already been waiting for them. 15 years. He'd served every day of it. Ruth filed for divorce in 1992. She moved away, changed her name back to her maiden name. By then 23, had grown up hearing one version of what her father had done, and that version had been told by a woman who believed it absolutely, because she had to, because the alternative was too much to hold. When Elijah was released in 2004, there was no one at the gate. He was 51 years old, no property. No savings. His assets had been seized as part of the legal proceeding. His name had been removed from every document connected to the Crestwood Grand. He spent that first year trying to find a path back, calling lawyers, writing letters, filing requests for document reviews. Every door closed, some quickly, some slowly, but they all closed, and by 2006 he had stopped trying to go through doors. He was living on the street by then, not because he'd given up. That was the thing people didn't understand. The thing Camille was only beginning to understand as she sat across from him in that alley and listened. He wasn't out there because he'd given up. He was out there because he'd made a decision. If no institution was going to give him access to what had been taken, then he was going to build his own case, his own evidence, his own record. He'd bought a cheap camera from a thrift store, a notebook, pens. And every night for 18 years he had sat in the vicinity of the Crestwood Grand and written down what he saw. He opened the burlap bag then, not dramatically, not like a reveal, just the way you open something you've carried for a long time. He took out the notebooks first. There were 11 of them, small, wire-bound, the kind you find at a dollar store. Each one dated on the cover, 2006 through the current year. He set them in a row on the cardboard. Then the photographs, hundreds of them organized in paper envelopes. Men in expensive cars. Men in suits meeting other men in suits at the side entrance of the hall. Transactions that looked, to anyone who didn't know what they were seeing, like nothing in particular. Elijah knew what they were seeing. Every year, he said, usually around the end of the quarter, you see the same faces, the same cars. Going in through the loading dock, not the main entrance. Coming out 20 minutes later. Camille picked up one of the photographs. 2 men by a dark car. One she didn't recognize. The other one she did. That's Marsh, she said. Third one from the left in that row, taken October 2019. Marsh has been receiving something for at least 6 years. I don't know exactly what. But it's regular and doesn't go through the front door. She set the photograph down. This isn't enough, she said, on its own. I mean photographs of people in a parking lot. No, he agreed. It's not, but combined with the deed and whatever's in the building's own records. Yes, she looked at him. You came back now because you knew someone would find the records. I came back now, he said, because I'm 71 years old, and waiting for the perfect moment is a luxury I've run out of. After he finished talking, Camille sat with everything he'd told her for a long moment. The rain had gone lighter, down to the kind of steady drizzle that doesn't bother you once you've already accepted you're wet. What do you need from me? She asked. I need someone inside the building, he said. Someone who can get to the records that are still there, the originals. The things they forgot to clean up or didn't know were there. The basement archives. Yes, she thought about it. The records room was 3 floors below the lobby, accessed through a service corridor that smelled like copper pipe and old paper. She'd been down there twice in 2 years, both times for mundane reasons. The overnight attendant barely looked up when staff came through. I can try, she said. He nodded at once. Not gratitude exactly, something more like acknowledgement. Like she had said a thing that needed to be said, and he had heard it. She stood up. Where will you be, she asked. Where I've been, he said. Close enough. She walked back through the rain toward her car, thinking about what she just agreed to and what it might cost her and whether that mattered. It mattered. She was going to do it anyway. Back in the lobby of the Crestwood Grand, the night had settled back into its normal rhythms. Glasses clinked. The string quartet had moved on to something new. Marsh stood near the entrance with his hands behind his back, overseeing the room with the satisfaction of a man who had handled something efficiently. He didn't notice that the trash can near the second desk was empty of the one thing he'd put in it. And at the far end of the service corridor, Carl Booker stood at his post, watching the lower-level monitors, waiting to make sure the north alley door had been used before he went back to lock it. The indicator light blinked once. He locked it. Then he stood there for a moment. He hadn't seen Elijah Cross in 48 years, and he had recognized him in about 3 seconds. There are people you don't forget. People whose presence leaves something behind in you even after they're gone, the way certain weather leaves a smell in the air that outlasts the storm itself. Elijah Crossbass had been that kind of presence. Carl reached into his breast pocket, took out a small photograph he'd been carrying for years. Faded, creased. A newspaper clipping, actually, printed on glossy stock the way they used to do for real estate supplements in the late 70s. 2 men in hard hats, groundbreaking. Walter Crestwood on the left, Elijah Cross on the right. Carl looked at it for a moment. Then he folded it and put it back. He'd been keeping his own record for 20 years. Not in notebooks, not in photographs, in copies. Quiet copies of documents he'd found in the basement archives over the course of 2 decades. Things that looked wrong. Things that looked like they'd been removed from somewhere and placed somewhere else. Things that didn't match up with what he knew the building's history to be. He hadn't known what to do with them. He was beginning to think he now knew. Camille was at the records room by 7:15 the next morning. She told the overnight attendant she needed to pull building maintenance records from the late 80s for a guest inquiry. He barely looked up. The filing cabinets went back to the building's founding. Everything after 1995 was digitized, but before that, the originals sat in gray metal drawers organized by year and category. She found the drawer marked 1976 to 1980. Pulled it open. The hanging files were crammed tight, the way old files always are when nobody's touched them in 20 years. She worked slowly, looking for anything with the words partnership or deed or cross. Found it in a manila folder labeled Original Property Documentation. The deed. The actual original, not a photocopy. The original signed document from February 1976 with both names on it, in ink that had faded slightly from dark blue to the color of a storm at distance. Elijah Cross, Walter Crestwood. She photographed a page. Then she went to the next drawer, 1985 to 1990. She found meeting minutes, board documentation, financial summaries, and she found very clearly that Elijah Cross's name appeared in everything up through late 1988. Regular, present, unremarkable. And then in 1990, gone, not struck through, not annotated, not recorded as resignation or buyout or legal transfer, simply absent, like he'd never been there. But that wasn't what made her go still. What made her go still was a single document tucked behind the 1989 quarterly report. A memo dated November 1989 from Walter Crestwood to the building's property management company. Subject line, record maintenance. The text was brief, professional. The language of a man who understood that certain things should be communicated in writing and left no room for misinterpretation. It said, effective immediately, all references to Cross in standing documentation are to be considered administrative errors and removed from the active record. Amended filings are to be processed at the corporate level. Do not retain originals. Do not retain originals. Camille read it twice. Then she photographed it. Then she stood in that underground room in the hum of old fluorescent lighting, sipped the smell of 50 years up around her, and understood something she should have been allowed to learn somewhere safer than this. That theft doesn't always look like theft. Sometimes it looks like paperwork. She came back upstairs at 7:58, 2 minutes before her just started. Marsh was already at the floor desk, going over the morning briefing with the overnight manager. He glanced at her when she came in. The look of a man watching for something and not wanting you to know he was watching. She'd seen that look before, growing up. On landlords, on school administrators, on people whose version of the story depended on you not knowing there was another version. She sat down at her station, logged in, put on her headset, and underneath the desk, very quietly, she sent the photographs to a private email address she never used for work. Just before 9, her phone buzzed. Darnell, got what you asked for, but something else happened. Someone came and asked me what I was doing with my phone. Not security. Management. She typed back, Ach. Wit, his reply. Marsh. She stared at that for a moment, then typed, be careful. Darnell. Already too late for that, I think. Carl found her on her break. She was in the staff corridor on the 3rd floor, eating half a sandwich and checking her messages. He appeared at the end of the corridor and walked toward her with the unhurried pace of a man who had walked these halls for decades and knew every foot of them. He stopped a few feet from her, looked at her for a moment. You were in the records room this morning, he said. Not a question. I was, she said. I know what you're looking for. She held very still. You recognized him, she said, last night. When he came in, Carl was quiet for a moment. I drove the first nail into that building, he said. Summer of 1977. I was a maintenance assistant, 20 years old. Elijah Cross came by the site every week, knew every worker's name, knew mine. He paused, brought lunch for the whole crew on the last day of framing, didn't make a show of it, just showed up with white sandwiches. He looked at her. I left the side door unlocked last night, he said. Camille blinked. You. North alley door, no camera on the outside angle. He would have known to look for it. She stared at him. You've me way, she said. Carl didn't answer that directly. He reached into the breast pocket of his uniform jacket and took out a folded envelope. I've been collecting things, he said, for about 20 years. Things that didn't match up. Things that seemed like they were supposed to not be there anymore. He held out the envelope. I don't know exactly what they are. I'm not a lawyer. I just know when something's been removed that shouldn't have been. She took the envelope. Carl, she said. He was already turning to go. Be careful, he said without looking back, and be fast. Those two things don't always go together in a place like this. The envelope held 17 items. Photocopies, technically. Printed on paper that had yellowed slightly at the edges. The kind of thing you make when you're not sure what you're doing, but you know you need to do something. They were copies of documents, financial records, transfer orders, things that, to an untrained eye, looked like routine corporate paperwork. Camille wasn't a lawyer, but she had eyes, and she could see that these documents, taken together, told a story about money moving in a direction that didn't match the official record of what had happened to the Crest Broad between 1988 and 1991. That night, Elijah sat on the floor of her apartment and went through each document one at a time. He didn't react much. His face was careful, controlled. But once, when he turned over a page and read what was on the back, his hands went completely still for a full 3 seconds. "What is it?" Camille asked. He showed her. It was a payment record, 1988, a transfer from an account she didn't recognize to a name she didn't recognize. "That name," Elijah said. He was on the jury. Silence. Rain against the window again. The city humming outside. "They paid a juror," Camille said. "They paid someone who was on the jury." He set the paper down carefully. "With this alone, probably not enough for a court, but combined with everything else." He looked at her. "It starts to look like a machine, not a mistake." Camille thought about that. A machine. That was the right word. Not a crime of passion, not one bad decision made in a desperate moment. A machine, built deliberately, running deliberately, maintained deliberately for 35 years. "What do we do now?" she asked. Elijah looked up at the document spread on her floor, at the notebooks, at 18 years of photographs. "Now," he said, "we find the people who know the rest." Outside, on the street below, a dark sedan had been parked in the same spot for 3 hours. Nobody inside the apartment knew it was there, but it was. Meanwhile, on the 41st floor of the Crestwood Grand, Jonathan Crestwood sat behind a desk that had been his father's and read the security report from the front desk incident. He was 51 years old. His father, Walter, had died in 2018 at 83, leaving behind a hotel, a company, and a lasting that still meant something in this city. Jonathan had grown up knowing that the name meant something. Had been told from early on that the name was what you protected above all else. He was good at protection. He'd spent his adult life building walls around the things his father had built. Legal structures, financial arrangements, a paper architecture so complex and layered that it had taken his team of lawyers years to construct and would take any challenger years to understand. He read the report a second time. Elijah Cross. The name sat there on the page, and Jonathan read it the way you read a word you've been half expecting to see for 35 years. He set the report down, poured 2 fingers of bourbon, didn't drink it. He'd been 19 years old when his father told him what he'd done. Not with pride, not as a confession either, as information, as the kind of thing a father tells a son when the son is old enough to understand the weight of what the family is and what it costs to keep it. Jonathan had been angry at first, not at the ethics of it. He'd been 19 and hadn't fully understood ethics yet, the way life teaches you to understand it. He was angry because he thought it was a risk. He'd asked his father, "What if someone finds out?" His father had said, "I've made sure no one can." For 35 years, his father had been right. Jonathan picked up his phone, called Victor Sims, his head of building security. "The man from tonight," he said. "I want to know where he goes, who he talks to. And I want to know if anyone inside this building has been in contact with him." He paused. "And Victor, don't be obvious about it." He set the phone down. Then he picked up the bourbon and finished it in one swallow. In the alley off Clement, the cardboard that Elijah had been sitting on was empty now. He'd moved on. He did that. Never stayed anywhere too long. It was a habit built from years of understanding that visibility was a liability he couldn't afford. He walked north through the drizzle, past the corner where the newspaper man worked, past the entrance to the parking structure where Carl had worked for almost 4 decades, past the side of the building he had helped build, running his eyes along the line of it, the way a person looks at something familiar that has been changed without their permission. He stopped at the far end of the block, looked up at the lit windows on the upper floors. Jonathan Crestwood was up there somewhere. Didn't know which window. Didn't need to know. Didn't need to see the man. He just needed to know the man was there and that what was coming was going to reach him. Elijah had spent 35 years being patient, not the patience of someone who has accepted defeat, not the patience of someone who has no other option, the patience of someone who understands that the right moment is a real thing, that it comes if you stay ready for it, that readiness and waiting are not the same thing even though they look alike from the outside. He put his hands in his pockets, turned away from the building, and went to find somewhere dry to sleep, because tomorrow they were going to start building the rest of the case, and he was going to need to be sharp for it. Agatha Sims lived in a part of the city that real estate listings called transitional, which was a word that meant it used to be something, and it's trying to be something else, and right now it's neither. The building she lived in was 4 stories of tan brick, on a street where half the storefronts were open and half had paper over the windows. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor. The buzzer panel by the front door had 12 names on it. 3 of them were covered with tape. Camille stood in front of the door at 9 in the morning and pressed the button next to the name that read, Sims A. Nothing. She pressed it again. A long pause. Then through the static. Who is it? Not a question. More like a wall, dressed up to sound like a question. My name is Camille Brooks. I work at the Crestwood Grand Hotel. I'm not here about anything legal, and I'm not here to cause trouble. I like to talk. Silence. Long enough that Camille started rehearsing when she'd what to do if the woman just never responded then. I don't know anything. I think you might know more than you realize. Another. Silence? Please, Camille said. I drove 40 minutes to get here, and I'm not going back until I at least ask. The door buzzed open. Agatha Sims was 73 years old and had the posture of someone who had spent decades trying to take up as little space as possible. She was a small woman, silver hair pulled back tight. Hands that moved constantly, adjusting her cardigan, straightening a coaster, picking up a cup and setting it back down without drinking from it. The apartment was clean in the way that says someone has had a long time to organize a small life and has done exactly that. She didn't offer Camille a seat. Camille sat down anyway. I'm here about Elijah Cross, she said. Agatha's hands went still, just for a beat. Then they started moving again. I told you, I don't know anything. You were his administrative coordinator from 1974 to 1989. I prepared a lot of documents back then. I don't remember the details of all of them. Camille looked at her, really looked, at the 2 careful hands, at the way her eyes moved to the window and then back again like she was checking to make sure something hadn't appeared outside. Mrs. Sims, Camille said, he's back. The hands went still again. This time they stayed still. Elijah Cross came back to the Crestwood Grand 6 nights ago. They threw him out. But before they did, he put a document on the front desk, a copy of the original deed. She paused. I kept it. Agatha looked at her for the first time with something other than deflection. He's alive, she said. It wasn't surprise, exactly. It was something older than surprise. Something that had been sitting in a closed room for a long time and had just been let out. He's alive, Camille said. He's 71. He's been living on the street since 2006, and he has 18 years of documentation that he put together himself from the sidewalk outside that building. She leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Sims, he needs people who were there, who can say what they saw. Something crossed Agatha's face, fast, then controlled. You don't understand what you're asking. I think I do. No, her voice was quiet, final. You don't. She stood up, walked to the window, stood there with her back to Camille, looking out at the street. She says 2 men came to my home, not to my office, to my home in the evening, when I was alone. Camille didn't speak. They were very polite. Sat down at my kitchen table without being invited. One of them put a folder on the table in front of me. She paused. Inside was everything about me. My bank account balance, the exact amount I owed on my mortgage, the name of my landlord, my professional licenses, organizations I belonged to, my mother's address. She turned around. Everything. Things that took me 30 years to build. And in about 4 minutes, 2 strangers in my kitchen showed me exactly how fast it could all disappear. Camille held the silence. They didn't say much after that, Agatha continued. They didn't need to. One of them closed the folder and put it back into his briefcase. Then they left. She looked at her hands. That was it. No threats spoken aloud. No instructions. They didn't need to say anything specific. I understood. And you stayed quiet? Yes. For 35 years. Yes. Camille waited. What do you want from me? Agatha asked. I want to know if you kept anything. Documents. Notes. Anything from those years that might still be around. A long pause. Agatha stood up again. Walked to the hallway. Camille heard a closet opening. Things being moved. Then Agatha came back carrying a flat metal box gray with a small combination lock on the front. She set it on the coffee table. I kept copies, she said, of everything I helped prepare before the trouble started. I knew enough to know that the official record could be changed, so I kept my own. She rested her hands on the box. I knew I couldn't let them disappear. Camille looked at the box. Mrs. Sims, she said, if this goes forward, if we can build a real case, we're going to need you to be part of it. Agatha looked at the box too. I'm 73 years old, she said. I don't have much left they can take. She opened the box. Inside were documents organized by year in paper sleeves. Financial summaries, meeting notes, correspondence. Things that a careful woman had quietly copied and kept and said nothing about for 35 years. Camille photographed everything. She didn't rush. She worked through each page methodically, making sure each image was clear before moving to the next. Agatha sat across from her and watched without speaking. When Camille finally looked up, Agatha was looking out the window. He was a good man, Agatha said quietly. Not to Camille specifically. More to the room, to the air, to whoever in that apartment had been listening for the past 35 years. He was a genuinely good man, and that was the thing they couldn't stand. Not just that he was successful, that he was good at it, that he was right about things, that people respected him. She paused. Walter Crestwood couldn't build the hotel without him, and he didn't tolerate that. Camille lowered her phone. Will you testify? She asked. When the time comes. Agatha was quiet for a long moment. Ask me again when the time comes, she said. I'll tell you the same thing I'm telling you now, but ask me again so I can say it on record. Camille nodded. She gathered her things, stood to leave. At the door, Agatha spoke again. Be careful, she said. The people who sent those men to my kitchen in 1989, their son is still running that hotel, and he learned from his father. Camille stepped out into the hallway. The door closed behind her. She stood there for a moment in the dim light of the corridor. Then she started walking. Donnicott got jumped on a Wednesday. Not badly, nothing broken. But he'd been walking back to his car after the late kitchen shift when two men stepped out of a doorway on the block behind the hotel and told him to hand over his phone. He gave it up. Because he wasn't stupid and phones can be replaced, and he'd watched enough of the world to know when a situation has only one reasonable exit. They took the phone and walked away without a word. He called Camille from a payphone 4 blocks away. They got the phone, he said. Are you okay? Yeah, but Camille, that wasn't a random mugging. She knew. She'd already known the moment her phone rang from an unknown number. The backup, she said. Tell me you did the backup. First thing I do every night before I leave the building. Everything goes to the cloud account. They got a phone with nothing on it except my mom's contact and a grocery list. She exhaled. Okay, but Darnell, you need to be careful now. Little late for that conversation. I'm serious. They're watching the building. Probably watching both of us. A pause on the line. Then we need to move faster, he said. He wasn't wrong. Carl found Camille the next morning outside the building, on the sidewalk, which was a deviation from his usual routine that she recognized immediately as significant. He'd never got to find her outside before. Always the corridor, always inside. He stopped beside her, looked straight ahead at the street. 2 things, he said. My access to the lower-level storage was revoked this morning. No explanation given. They know you've been helping. They suspect they don't know what I had. But they know something. He paused. Second, last night there was a meeting late, after 11. I couldn't see who was in it because I don't have access to that floor anymore, but I could see the light on in Jonathan's office from the parking structure. It was on until past 1 in the morning. He's planning something. That's what I'd guess. Carl looked at her steadily. I've worked in this building for a long time. When the Crestwood family can't defend something, they move it. That's always been the pattern. He put his hands in his coat pockets and walked back toward the entrance without another word. Camille stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Then she pulled out her phone and called Elijah. They met at a diner 3 blocks from the hotel. Corner booth. She told him what Carl had said. Elijah listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. There's something else we need, he said. Something that ties everything together. What? Walter kept a ledger, a physical book. Everything that couldn't go through official channels went in there by hand. I know because Agatha told me years ago, before everything happened. She'd seen him use it. He kept it locked in his office. He paused. After he died, that office became Jonathan's. Camille looked at him. You think Jonathan still has it? I think Jonathan has everything. That's who he is. He doesn't destroy things his build. He maintains them, controls them. He looked at his coffee. The ledger is the piece that ties the jury payment to Walter directly, in his own handwriting. Without that, what we have is strong. But a good defense attorney can create doubt around it. And with the ledger? With the ledger, it becomes something a prosecutor can't walk away from. Camille sat back. "So we need to get into Jonathan Crestwin's private office," she said. Yes, she thought about it. Her keycard still gave her access to the executive floor. She hadn't been told otherwise, which either meant Jonathan's people hadn't flagged her yet, or they were letting her move freely because they were watching to see what she'd do. Neither option was comfortable. "When?" she asked. "Soon," he said, "before he moves whatever he's planning to move." He met her eyes across the table. "I wouldn't ask you to do this if I thought there was another way," he said. "I know," she said. She did know. That was the thing. After 3 weeks of watching this man operate, of understanding the patience and the persistence and in the years of quiet preparation that had brought him to this moment, she knew exactly what it cost him to need help. And she knew that he wouldn't ask unless he was certain it mattered. "Give me 2 days," she said. The plan came together slowly, and then all at once the way plans do when the pieces have been sitting separately waiting for someone to see how they connect. Camille spent the 2 days doing what she always did at work, her shift, her duties, her ordinary professional presence. She spoke to Marsh twice, both times brief and routine. She watched his eyes without appearing to watch them, and registered that Hal was watching her without appearing to watch her. They were performing normalcy for each other. She found the building schematics on her second day. Old documents in the filing system that predated the 2018 renovation that showed the original office configuration on the executive floor before the layout was changed. She photographed them, studied them that evening. There was a maintenance room adjacent to Jonathan's office, connected by an internal door that had existed since the building's original construction. The renovation had sealed the main entrance to the maintenance room from the executive corridor, but the internal connecting door was still in the schematics. She took the schematics to Carl. He looked at them for a long time. "That door is still there," he said finally. "I've been that maintenance room. They just changed the access point. The room itself is the same. Can my key card open it?" He looked at the schematic again, traced a route with his finger. "The maintenance room runs on the old access system," he said. "They never updated it during the renovation. I think yes. I think your card would work on the maintenance room reader." He paused. "I can't be certain without testing it. We only get one chance to test it." "Yes," he said. "We do." She told Elijah that evening. He listened to the whole plan, asked 2 questions, both of them practical, about the layout and the timing. Then he said, "Whatever is in that safe, photograph everything. Don't take anything unless you can take it without them knowing it's gone. And if I find the ledger," he was quiet for a moment. "Take it," he said. "If the ledger is there, take it. We can't leave it for him to destroy." She nodded. "One more thing," he said. "What?" "There may be other things in that safe, documents we don't know about, things that haven't appeared in any record we've looked at." He looked at her steadily. "Photograph all of it. Don't stop to read anything while you're in there. Just photograph and get out." "Okay." She looked at him. "Be faster than you think you need to be." The night she went in was a Thursday, thin clouds, cold but not bitter. She arrived for a shift that ended at 9, stayed at her station until 9:15, said goodnight to the desk manager, walked toward the elevator as if she were leaving, got off on the 40th floor instead of the lobby. The executive corridor was carpeted and quiet. The security desk outside Jonathan's office was empty, the guard reassigned to an evening event in the ballroom 2 floors down. She'd known this because she'd checked the event schedule 2 days earlier. Jonathan's charity dinner for the City Business Council. He would be downstairs for at least another 2 hours. She pressed her card against the reader of the maintenance room door at the end of the corridor. The light blinked red. She stood there, pressed it again. Red. She closed her eyes for a second. Then she tried the passcode override that Carl had mentioned, the fake secondary access method built into the old system for when cards failed. A 6-digit code that maintenance staff used when their cards malfunctioned. Carl had given her the code that morning without explanation, the way he gave her most things, quietly and directly, trusting that she'd know what it was for. She entered it. Green. She pushed the door open. The maintenance room was small and full of the kind of equipment that keeps a 42-story building running and that nobody who works in the nice parts of the building ever thinks about. Circuit panels. Access terminals. Backup hardware for the building management system. On the far wall was a door, old, solid wood, with a handle instead of a card reader. She turned the handle. It opened. Jonathan Crestwood's office was large and still, and lit on by the ambient glow of the city coming through the floor to ceiling windows on the east side. She didn't stop to take it in. She moved directly to the painting on the east wall, the large one between the window and the kind of placement that is less about displaying art and more about what sits behind it. She moved it aside, a safe combination dial, old, the kind with no electronic component that can be remotely wiped. She spun the dial through the combination Carl had given her. The numbers Walter Crestwood had used on his office access codes for 15 years. The ones Carl's had seen him enter enough times to commit to memory. Red light, wrong combination. She tried the variant. Reversed the last two numbers. The change a person makes when they want to feel like they've updated something without actually having to remember something new. The safe opened, inside. Cash, banded. A stack of documents, paper clipped together. A sealed envelope with no label on the front, and a book, slim, dark, green leather cover, worn at the corners. The kind of book that has been opened many times and by hands that were not always careful. She took it out, opened it to confirm, small, precise handwriting, dates running down the left margin. Names of She turned to 1989. W. Matters, Phase 2, March. Wilson confirmed, 15K, transfer via holding co. Cross-on-Siteman filed timeline holding. She photographed every page of 1989, then 1988. Then she went backward through the entire book, working fast, hands steady. She was reaching for the sealed envelope when a sound registered. Not inside the office. In the corridor outside, she stopped, listened, footsteps, not hurried, measured, the walk of someone who knows exactly where he's going. She looked at the safe, at the envelope, inside it. She closed the safe, replaced the painting, moved back toward the maintenance room door. She was 2 steps from it when the office door opened and the light came on, not flooding the room. Just the desk lamp, switching on with a click that in the sudden silence was as loudest thing she'd heard. She turned around. Jonathan Crestwood was standing in the doorway of his office. He was in a suit jacket and dark trousers. He looked at her without surprise, without anger, with something that was closer to recognition. The look of a man who has been waiting for a specific thing to happen and has now watched it happen. "Miss Brooks," he said. She was still holding the ledger. She didn't put it down. He walked to his desk, sat down, looked at her across the room. "You can leave the book," he said. "I'd prefer it, but I'm not going to physically take it from you. How do you prefer to handle things?" He looked at the ledger in her hands. "Quietly," he said, with as little disruption as possible to the people involved. Like Darnell Osei, Wednesday's night. That was very quiet. Something moved behind his eyes, very small, but there. "I don't know what you're referring to." 2 men outside the staff entrance. His phone. That was quiet. Sure, he didn't respond to that. "Sit down, Ms. Brooks," he said. "I'd rather stand." He leaned back in his chair. "Let me tell you something," he said. "And I want you to actually hear it, not just wait for me to finish so you can respond." She waited. "I know what my father did," he said. "I have known since I was 19 years old. He told me the way fathers tell sons things that they want passed down, not as a confession. As context." He paused. "I was angry. Not for the right reasons. I was 19 and I thought about risk before I thought about anything else. I asked him what happens if someone finds out. He said he'd made sure no one could. And you believed him. For 32 years, he was right." He looked at the ledger. "That book, by itself, is a document of uncertain provenance found in circumstances that will be aggressively challenged. My legal team will have 17 responses to it within a week. You understand that. I understand that you think that. It's not what I think, it's what will happen." He said it without heat, like a man stating something he has confirmed many times and no longer finds interesting. "What do you actually want, Ms. Brooks? If we're past the part where you pretend you're just here for the documents." Camille looked at him. "I want Elijah Cross to get back what your father took from him." Jonathan's expression didn't change. "That's not a simple thing," he said. "The legal architecture around this property has been built over 30 years, even with the ledger, even with whatever else you've found. You're looking at years of litigation against a team that knows every detail of what my father built and what I've added to it." He looked at her steadily. "I'm not trying to frighten you. I'm being honest with you, which is more than most people in my position would bother to do." She stood there holding the ledger. He was right that it would take years. She knew enough to know he was right. But she also knew something she was fairly certain he didn't know she knew. Your father couldn't sleep, she said, his small but real. Excuse you, father, not one full night, not since 1989. She watched Face Kiss fail. Is that something you know about him? The silence in the room went a different quality. Jonathan said nothing. She walked to the maintenance room door, put her hand on it. I'm taking the ledger, she said. He didn't move, didn't call out, didn't reach for his phone. She walked through the door and pulled it shut behind her. She moved through the maintenance room and back into the executive corridor, down to the service elevator, into the parking structure from the lower-level exit, out through the north side of the building, into the cold night air. Her hands were completely steady. She noticed that and found it strange. She had expected shaking, expected the delayed arrival of fear now that the moment had passed. But her hands were steady and her breathing was even. And what she felt, standing in the cold outside a building she'd just walked out of carrying evidence from a man's private safe, was something she could only describe as clarity. She texted Elijah, I have it. His reply came back in under a minute. James Cross Street, Toops East, Toops, 3 minutes closer, so 3 minutes later, Mike saw him coming around the corner, same coat, same bag, same unhurried walk. He stopped in front of her. She held out the ledger. He took it, held it in both hands, and looked at the cover for a moment. Dark green leather worn at the corners. Then he opened it, turned to 1989 without looking for the year, like a man who knew exactly how many pages in it would be. He read for about 30 seconds, then he closed it. It's there, he said. Everything? Everything, she exhaled. He let me leave, she said. He was there when I came out from behind the painting. He let me walk out with it. Elijah looked at her. Yes, he said. He would. Why? Elijah thought about it. Because Jonathan Crestwood is a man who has always believed he can manage any situation, he said. Letting you leave with the ledger and then defeating it in court is a better door for him than physically stopping you and creating a scene. He looked at the book. He doesn't know what we have in addition to this. He thinks the ledger is all we have. Is that enough for him to underestimate us? It's enough for now, he said. But we need to move. They met Darnell at a diner 2 miles from the hotel. Different diner, different part of the city. Darnell was already in a booth when they arrived, nursing a coffee and watching the door. He looked at the ledger when Elijah set it on the table. That's it, he said. That's it, Camille said. Darnell looked at it for a moment. All of that, he said quietly, for a book. Elijah looked at him. Not just a book, he said. A record. Walter Crestwood kept a record because he needed one, to track what he'd paid and to whom and when. He kept it because he was his man who needed to see his own transactions, to confirm they were real. He paused. It's the same reason I kept notebooks. The impulse is the same. The difference is what's being recorded. Darnell picked up his coffee. So what now? Camille had been thinking about this since she walked out of Jonathan's office. I've been researching, she said. An FBI agent. Financial Crimes Division. Her name is Renee Holloway. She has an open file on Crestwood Properties that goes back 10 years. I found references to it in 2 separate court filings that mentioned her name in connection with a related investigation. Elijah looked at her. You've already identified her. I identified her 3 days ago. I didn't say anything because I wanted to have the ledger before I approached anyone official. He was quiet for a moment. Then something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, the precursor to one. The acknowledgement that the person across from him has done something worth acknowledging. Good thinking, he said. Camille pulled out her laptop, showed them what she'd found. Holloway's name in 2 court documents, an interview she'd given to a legal publication 4 years ago about patterns of financial concealment in multi-generational property companies. The way the interview was phrased, careful and technical and precise, told Camille something about the kind of person Holloway was. Not someone who made claims she couldn't support, not someone who moved before she was ready, someone who had been waiting for the right moment. Same as Istiza. That was the thing Camille had recognized and why she'd decided Holloway was the right person. I'll reach out to her tomorrow, Camille said. Through what channel? Darnell asked. The FBI tip line first, to establish a record. Then directly through the contact information listed in that legal publication. She looked at Elijah. I think she already knows most of the financial picture. I think what she's been missing is this primary evidence connecting it to the original crime. The ledger, Elijah said, and Agatha, and Carl's documents, and the original deed. She looked at him steadily. I think when she sees all of it together, she'll move. Elijah looked at the ledger on the table. Outside the diner windows, the city moved past in its ordinary way. Cars and pedestrians and the particular indifferent rhythm of a place that contains millions of stories and registers almost none of them. There's one more thing, Camille said. Both men looked at her. She'd been trying to figure out how to say this for 4 days. She still hadn't found the right way, so she decided to just say it. Naomi Cross, she said, your daughter. Elijah went very still. She's in this city? Camille said. She's been here for 6 years. She's a civil rights attorney. She works 3 miles from the Crestwood Grand. She paused. She doesn't know you're here, but I found something in her public court filings from last year. A motion in a housing discrimination case. She cited a legal precedent, a property dispute case from 1999. She looked at him. The case had your name attached to it, Elijah. She found it in her own research. She's been circling to the edges of your story without knowing it was yours. The diner noise continued around them. Someone laughing at the counter, the sound of plates. Elijah didn't say anything for a long time. How old is she now? He asked. His voice was completely level, the control of a man who has learned to hold difficult things without letting them show. 55, Camille said. He nodded once. She thinks I'm guilty, he said. She thought you were guilty, Camille said, based on what she was told when she was 20 years old. She paused. She's a civil rights attorney who spent her career fighting exactly the kind of thing that was done to you. She got there on her own, without knowing. Don't contact her yet, he said. Not until Holloway has everything in her hands. If Nao finds things out before then, it puts her into the position, and I want her. Camille nodded. But after, he said. After Holloway has it. Yes, Camille said. After. He picked up his coffee, held it in both hands. She was 20 years old, he said quietly. Standing at the top of the staircase at 2 in the morning, watching them put handcuffs on her father. He paused. She believed what she believed because she had to. Because the alternative was that everything that happened to our family happened because of someone else's choice. And that's harder to carry than believing the person you loved was the problem. He set the coffee down. I don't blame her, he said. I want you to understand that. Not even a little. The booth was quiet for a moment. Darnell was looking at the ledger. Carl's documents sat in an envelope on the seat beside Camille. Agatha's photographs were on her phone. 35 years of buried truth sitting on a diner table at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night. Okay, Camille said. Tomorrow I contact Holloway. Elijah nodded. She looked at him. Are you ready for what comes after that? She asked. He thought about it honestly. The way he thought about things, from the inside, without performing the answer. For the legal part, he said yes. I've been ready for that. For 18 years, he paused. For Naomi. He looked at the window, at the city outside. I don't know how you get ready for that. Darnell picked up his coffee. You don't, he said. You just do it anyway. Elijah looked at him. Then he looked back at the window. Outside, 2 blocks east and 1 block north, a dark sedan was parked on a side street with its office off and its occupant watching the entrance of the diner through the glass. The occupant picked up a phone, made a call, said they're all 3 together, and waited for instructions. Renee Holloway had been with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division for 17 years. She was 44 years old and had long since removed surprise from her working vocabulary. Surprise cost time. In her line of work, time was the one thing you couldn't recover once it was gone. She had first opened a file on the Crestwood organization in 2014, not because of Elijah Cross. She hadn't known about Elijah Cross in 2014. She'd opened the file because of a pattern she'd noticed in a broader investigation into a real estate holding company with connections to 3 different states. The Crestwood name had appeared as a footnote, a single transaction in 2011 that didn't match its surrounding documentation. She'd pulled that thread. She'd been pulling it for 10 years. What she found was extraordinary in its construction and deeply frustrating in its evidentiary weight. Jonathan Crestwood had spent 3 decades building legal structures that were individually entirely legitimate. It was only when you laid them side by side, when you traced the full shape of what they were arranged around, that you could see what they were protecting. But seeing and proving are very different things. She needed something from inside the original event. not just the decades of careful management that followed it. Something primary, something that connected Jonathan's elaborate financial architecture to the crime that made it necessary. She hadn't found it. Until her phone rang on a Friday morning, and a woman named Camille Brooks asked if she could come in. They met in Holloway's office at 2 in the afternoon. Camille came alone. She set a USB drive on the desk and a dark green leather book beside it, and she didn't say anything while Holloway looked at both of them. Holloway picked up the ledger first, opened it, read a page, turned to another. Her face didn't change. Then she plugged in the USB drive, went through the files methodically, the deed photographs. The memo from Walter dated November 1989. Carl's documents, Agatha's copies, the payment record with the juror's name. She read for 11 minutes without speaking. Then she looked up. "Letter," she said. "You have the physical book?" "Yes, that's it. Where was it?" "Jonathan Crestwood's office safe." A pause, very brief. "How did you access the safe?" A combination that a longtime employee knew from watching Walter Crestwood use it over many years. Holloway looked at her steadily. "And Jonathan Crestwood was aware you had entered his office. He came in while I was there. He saw me leave with the book. He didn't stop you." "No." Holloway was quiet for a moment, looking at the ledger. "He let you leave because he believes he can defeat it in court," Camille said. "He told me as much. He said his legal team would have 17 responses to it within a week." "He's not entirely wrong about that," Holloway said. "The chain of custody on this book is going to be attacked aggressively. His lawyers will argue uncertain provenance, possible alteration. They'll bring in their own handwriting expert." "I know." But Holloway looked at the US drive. "He doesn't know about this, all of this together. The financial records, the juror payment, the 1989 memo in Walter's own language." She paused. "And he doesn't know about me." She looked at Camille. "I've been building a parallel case for 10 years, she said. "What I've had is the behavior. The pattern of asset transfers, the legal structures, arranged around Central Alp's absence, the shape of concealment without the crime it was concealing." She looked at the ledger. "What you've brought me is the crime. The original event that produced everything I've been documenting." She set the ledger down carefully. "Combined, this isn't uncertain provenance. This is corroboration across multiple independent sources spanning 35 years. Camille looked at her. "There's something else you need to know, somebody," she said. "Carl Booker, the building employee who provided some of these documents, was told this week that his access to the lower levels has been revoked. Jonathan held a late meeting in his office 2 nights ago that lasted past 1 in the morning." Holloway's expression sharpened, very slightly. "He's moving something," Camille said. "Yes," Holloway said. "I know. I've been watching this asset transfer activity for 3 years. He's been incrementally shifting holdings into a structure in another state. It's been slow, and it's been careful, and it's been designed to be judgment-proof if the original fraud ever came to light." She looked at Camille directly. "If we don't move within the next 10 days, a significant portion of what could be recovered will be in a jurisdiction where recovery becomes very difficult." Camille sat with that. 10 days. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "Agatha Sims needs to give a formal statement as soon as possible. I can arrange that. Carl Booker as well. Yes, and I need Elijah Cross." She paused, "not as a complainant at this stage. Just present. I want to speak with him before we execute." Camille nodded. "There's one more thing," she said. "Naomi Cross, his daughter. She's a civil rights attorney. She works in this city, and she doesn't know her father is here or that any of this is happening." Holloway looked at her. "She needs to know before it becomes public," Holloway said. "I know. Elijah asked me to wait until you had everything. I have everything." Holloway looked at the ledger and the Yanis on her desk. "This is everything. Tell him it's time." Camille called Elijah from the parking garage beneath the federal building. "She's moving," she said. "She says 10 days, 8 most." A pause on the line. "And Naomi?" he asked. Camille looked at the concrete wall of the parking structure, at the yellow lines marking each space, at the ordinary infrastructure of an ordinary building in the middle of an ordinary afternoon in which nothing ordinary was happening. Holloway said, "It's time," she said. Silence. "Okay," he said. "Are you ready?" A longer silence this time. "No," he said, "but I'm going to do it anyway." He made the call that evening. He sat in the room he was renting at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, at the small table by the window, and he held the phone in his hand for a long time before he dialed. Not because he was afraid of the conversation. He'd been having it in his head for 20 years. He knew every version of it. He'd thought through what she might say and what he would answer and where the silences would fall. He was holding the phone because once he made this call, everything that had been only his for the past 18 years would belong to someone else too. To someone who deserved it, but still. He dialed. 3 rings. Then, this is Naomi Cross, professional, precise. The voice of someone who answers her phone ready to work. Naomi, he said. The silence that followed lasted long enough. He pulled filters to call is still connected. Then Dad. 1 word. Every year she'd lived without him packed into it. I know this is. He stopped. Started again. There are things happening. Things that are going to be on the news in the next few days. I wanted you to hear from me before that. A pause. Where are you? She said. I'm in the city. Been in the city for a while. How long is a while? He didn't answer that directly. Some things needed to be said in order, and this one could wait. I need you to listen, he said. There's a lot to say, and some of it you won't be ready for. And I'm going to say it anyway, because I've been waiting too long to say it carefully. Another pause. Okay, she said. He talked for 11 minutes. He told her about Walter Crestwood and the partnership agreement and the private investigator Walter had hired in 1986. He told her about the forged financial records and the jury that had been worked before it was seated. He told her about the 15 years and coming out in 2004 with nothing and every door closing. He told her about 2006 and the notebooks and the 18 years of watching the building from the sidewalk. He told her about Camille finding the deed in the trash, about Carl's envelopes, about Agatha and the metal box she'd kept locked in her closet for 35 years. He told her about the ledger. She didn't interrupt once. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. The case I filed last year, she said. The housing discrimination motion, the precedent I cited. A property dispute from 1990. Yes, I found that case in 2019. I was doing research for a different matter, and it came up as a footnote, and something about it, she stopped. Something about it felt like something I'd been looking for without knowing what I was looking for. I know, he said. I didn't know it was yours.
I know. A silence between them, Sam.
Different from the silences before. Less defended. Are you safe? She asked. Yes. Are the people who helped you safe? He noticed the question. Noticed what kind of question it was. Not procedural. Already thinking about who needed to be protected and how. Yes, he said. For now. There's going to be legal opposition, she said. Even with a federal case. Even with all of that. His team is going to make this as complicated as possible for as long as possible. You understand that. I've had 35 years to think about it. Naomi was quiet. I have questions, she said finally. I know. A lot of them know. I'm not. She stopped. He could hear her controlling something. I'm not ready to be okay with any of this yet. I want you to know that. I understand. But I'm going to be there, she said. Whatever is happening and whenever it happens, I'm going to be there. He looked out the window of the boarding house room at the street below, at the ordinary evening traffic, at a woman walking a dog, at a man carrying groceries up the steps of the building across the way. You don't have to, he said. I know I don't have to. Her voice was steady now, clear. I'll be there. After he hung up, he sat at the table for a long time without moving. Then he opened the new notebook he'd bought the week before, the one he wasn't using for surveillance, the personal one. He wrote 1 line, she answered. Then he closed it and went to sleep. Holloway's team executed the warrant on a Tuesday afternoon at 2:47, not at the hotel. At the corporate offices of Crestwood Properties 6 blocks east, where Jonathan had been since 11 that morning in a meeting with his legal team. 4 agent, the warrant. The particular efficiency of people who have been waiting for a specific moment and have arrived at it without drama. Jonathan was in the conference room when they came in. His lead attorney started speaking immediately, the prepared response. Holloway waited for a pause. Jonathan Crestwood, she said, I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of conspiracy, fraud, obstruction of justice, and asset concealment. I also have a warrant to seize all financial records related to the Crestwood Grand Hotel and Crestwood Property LLC. Jonathan looked at her. His attorney was still talking. Jonathan raised one hand slightly, and his attorney stopped. He stood up. I heard you, he said. He put his hands out in front of him, not behind his back. In front, the gesture of a man who has decided, in whatever interior space he keeps his decisions, that this particular moment will be handled without resistance. As Holloway's team led him out through the lobby of the Crestwood Properties offices, Jonathan stopped once. Not at the door. In the middle of the lobby briefly, looking at nothing specific. He said quietly enough that only the agent beside him could hear it clearly. He should have had all of this 30 years ago. Then he walked out. Camille was with Elijah when the text came through from Holloway at 2:51. Executed. He's in custody. Assets frozen pending court order. She turned the phone so he could read it. He read it. Set the phone back on the table between them. He didn't say anything for a moment. She watched his face carefully, looking for what she expected to find. Relief. Some version of triumph. The love, something long deferred. It wasn't any of those things. What was on his face was quieter than any of those things. The face of a man who has been carrying something for so long that setting it down doesn't feel like freedom yet. It feels like the first moment of understanding how heavy it was. Carl should know, he said finally. I'll text him. And Agatha. Yes, and Darnell. She sent messages to all three. Short. It happens. You're all safe. Carl's reply came back in 2 minutes, 3 words. Thank God Almighty. Agatha took 20 minutes then. I'll sleep tonight. Darnell sent back 4 question marks followed by, wait, is this real? Camille looked up from her phone. Elijah was looking out the window of the coffee shop at the street, at the ordinary afternoon moving past outside. People walking, a bus pulling away from the stop, a child on a bicycle with an adult jogging alongside. You okay? She asked. Not yet, he said. Simply without drama. But I think I'm going to be. That's different from where I was. The coffee shop door opened and Naomi Cross walked in. She was tall, she had his eyes. There was no way around that fact. Whatever she had become in 55 years, whatever she had built and survived and decided, she had done it with Elijah Cross's eyes. She saw them immediately. Camille, first, then Elijah. She stopped about 4 feet from the table. Elijah stood up. They looked at each other. She had been rehearsing what she would say since the phone call 4 days ago. She'd worked out several occasions. She was a lawyer. She worked with language for a living. She knew how to construct what she wanted to say before she said it. She said none of it. Instead, she said, "You're thinner than I remember." He looked at her. "You look like your mother," he said, when she was working through something. Naomi's mouth did something complicated. She sat down. Camille picked up her coffee. San said she was going to get a refill and took a very long time at the counter. What passed between Elijah and Naomi in the next 20 minutes was not a reconciliation. It was something more honest than that, more difficult. Reconciliation implies returning to a previous state. There was no previous state to return to. Naomi had been 20 years old the last time she'd seen him, and that was 35 years ago, and she had spent those years becoming a person without him in it. She had questions. She asked them without softening them. She asked why he hadn't tried harder to reach her after he got out. He told her the truth. He had tried twice in the first year. She hadn't responded. He'd understood that to mean she was building something that his presence would complicate, and he'd decided that her life was more important than his need to be in it. She told him she hadn't responded because she hadn't known how, because responding would have meant opening a door the mother had spent years helping her keep closed, and she hadn't been ready. He told her. He understood that now. She asked him about the years on the street. He told her without softening it. The cold, the invisibility. The particular experience of walking past a building you helped create while the people inside it look through you like glass. He told her about the notebooks, about the camera from the thrift store, about the decision to stop trying to go through doors and to start building something no door could stop. She listened to all of it with the stillness of someone holding themselves carefully together. Then she asked the question he could tell she'd been building toward. Did you think about me, she said. During all of it, he looked at her. Every day, he said, every single day. I thought about what you might be doing. Whether you'd found work that meant something to you. Whether you were, he stopped. Whether you were okay. And I told myself that if you were okay, it was better that I wasn't part of it. That whatever you'd built to explain your life was holding you up. And I didn't have the right to take that away from you. She looked at him. That wasn't your call to make, she said. No, he agreed. It wasn't. They sat with that. I'm not okay right now. she said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not going to pretend I am. I know, but I'm going to help. I know what the next several months of this looks like from a legal standpoint. You're going to need someone who can fight it at that level. She looked at him directly. I'm that person. He looked at his daughter. Yes, he said. You are. It wasn't warmth yet. It wasn't forgiveness yet. It was something more durable than either of those things. It was two people who had been separated by a lie for 35 years, sitting across a table from each other, deciding to move forward from where they actually were instead of where they wished they were. That was enough. For now, it was enough. The trial took 11 days. There were no dramatic speeches, no moments where the truth cracked open suddenly. What there was instead was the slow accumulation of evidence across 11 days of testimony and documentation, the patient construction of something that had been obscured for 35 years. Agatha Sims testified on the fourth day. She wore a gray suit. She had her hair done. She sat in the witness box with her hands folded in her lap, and she answered every question in a voice that was quiet and did not waver. She described documents she had prepared in 1976. The versions she had seen altered before the trial, the men who came to her home, the folder on her kitchen table. The prosecutor asked her, "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Agatha was quiet for a moment. "Because I was afraid," she said, "and I convinced myself that being afraid was the same as having no choice. It took me a long time to understand those aren't the same thing." She looked out at the gallery, at Elijah sitting in the second row. He nodded once. She nodded back. Carl testified on the seventh day. He brought copies of everything, organized by year, with date and locations of discovery written in the soap books he'd started specifically for this purpose. Jonathan's attorney asked him, "You kept these documents for 20 years without knowing what they were for?" Carl thought about it. "I kept them because someone tried to get rid of them," he said. "In my experience, things that get thrown away on purpose are usually worth keeping." Naomi handled the evidentiary challenges herself. She spent 3 days on the stand for the preliminary hearing, presenting the methodology by which each piece of evidence had been found and preserved. She was precise. She was patient. She answered every challenge without yielding a word. The defense attacked the ledger's chain of custody, argued possible alteration, announced they would bring their own handwriting expert. Naomi had retained a forensic document examiner from a university 2 states away. Someone with no prior connection to anyone in the case. The examiner had compared the ledger's handwriting across 47 years of Walter Crestwood's documented correspondence. The probability of attribution was 96.8%. Jonathan's lead attorney requested a recess. During the recess, Holloway sat down next to the gallery. "That's over," she said quietly. "They know it's over. The rest of this is about negotiating how it ends." Camille looked at her. "How does it end?" "Better than it started," Holloway said. "For your guy." The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom didn't erupt. There were people who exhaled. There were people who pressed their hands together without seeming to notice they were doing it. There was a woman in the back row who had lost a business in 1993 and had come every single day of the trial and who put her face in her hands and stayed like that for a long moment. Elijah sat in the second row and heard the word and was completely still. Naomi was beside him. She reached over and put her hand on top of his. He turned his hand over and held hers. Neither of them said anything. The room was very quiet for a moment in the way that rooms go quiet when something true has finally been said out loud after a very long time. Sentencing was 3 weeks later. The judge spoke for a long time before pronouncing sentence. She talked about the nature of the crime. Not just the financial elements, the human elements. 15 years a man spent imprisoned for something invented to destroy him. 18 years after that on the streets of a city that contained the building he had helped design and build. The deliberate erasure of his name from a record that should have carried it, she said. Some crimes are committed once and felt for a lifetime. This was one of those crimes. Jonathan stood through all of it with his hands clasped in front of him. When the sentence was pronounced, he nodded slightly. The nod of a man who has been running from a specific moment for 32 years and has now arrived at it and finds it to be exactly what he expected. As he was being led out, he passed within a few feet of where Elijah sat. He stopped. His attorney touched his arm. He moved the attorney's hand aside gently. He looked at Elijah. "There was a letter," he said. My father wrote it in 2016, 2 years before he died. He gave it to me and asked me to read it. He paused. I read it. I kept it. I didn't do anything with it. Elijah looked at him. I know about the letter, he said. Something moved across Jonathan's face. It's in the documents Holloway seized, Elijah said. It came out in Discovery. Jonathan was quiet for a moment. Then you know what it said. Yes, they looked at each other. I should have. Jonathan stopped. There's nothing I can say about what I should have done. No, Elijah said. There isn't. A moment passed between them. Not forgiveness. Not anything that could be named easily. Just two men acknowledging that something true had been confirmed, that both of them had known for a long time, and that the confirming of it had cost more than it should have cost. Then Jonathan walked out with the officers, and Elijah turned back to face the front of the courtroom, and the room began to move again the way rooms do after long stillness. The civil proceedings that followed took 4 months. Naomi drove them. The legal restoration of Elijah's name in the proprietary records, the financial settlement, the transfer of a 50% ownership stake in the Crestwood Grand Hotel back to Elijah Crosstoud. It took 3 weeks of paperwork and 2 court appearances. During those 4 months, other things happened. People called Naomi's firm. People who had been watching the case and recognized something in it. A man in his 60s who had owned a building 3 blocks from the Crestwood Grand and lost it in 1994 under circumstances that had never fully made sense. A woman in her 70s whose late husband had been in business with a Crestwood subsidiary in the late 80s and whose family had spent 30 years believing he had simply made all bad decisions. A former city planner who had been quietly pressured to resign in 1990 after raising questions about the permitting process for a Crestwood development. None of their cases were identical to Elijah's, but they rhymed, in the specific way that things rhyme when they come from the same source. Naomi took every call. One evening, Elijah sat with her in her office while she worked through the files. She'd been at it for 11 hours. He wasn't there to advise. He sat in the chair across from her desk and kept her company the way people keep each other company when the work is long and the language for what's actually happening hasn't fully arrived yet. Around 10, she looked up. 11 cases with direct documentary connections to Crestwood operations, she said. 11 families. More than that, he said quietly. No, 11 I can document right now. She looked at him. We can't fix all of it in this case. But we can make the case broad enough that it creates precedent for the others. That's what I'm building toward. He nodded. She went back to her screen. He watched her work. He thought about Ruth, about what she would have made of this. Of their daughter at 55 years old, fighting a fight that had started before Naomi was born. Fighting it with the same clarity and commitment that Elijah had recognized in himself when he was young, and hadn't yet known what the world would ask of it. He thought about Ruth for a long time and said nothing about it. Some things you carry quietly even after you no longer have to carry them alone. The Crestwood Grandson was Naomi's idea, not a celebration, not a gala. She was clear about that in every conversation leading up to it. She sent personal invitations to each individual and family whose cakes had been documented in the broader investigation. People who had lost things and never gotten them back. People who had spent years being told what happened to them was their own fault, or just how things went, or simply not spoken of at all. Some of them came from far away, some were old and came with help. Some had died in the years since losses and were represented by a son or daughter who had grown up in the shadow of something they'd been told was their parents' failure. About 70 people, the lobby had been rearranged. Folding chairs in rows, a microphone stand near the front desk. The chandeliers doing what they always did overhead, indifferent and bright, not knowing that what was happening beneath them was different from anything that had happened in this room before. Elijah stood at the front. He didn't have notes. He looked out at the room, at the faces, at people who had come because something had finally happened, and they needed to be in the same place when they marked it, he said. I've been asked what I want to do with this building. I've been thinking about what answer I could give that was actually true. The room was quiet. I don't have a grand plan, he said. I know what I want to start with. I want this to be a place where the people in this room are not invisible, where the things that were done to you and to me and to others like us are not erased. He paused. I spent years outside the door, that Doe said, And I want you to understand something about those years. I was not waiting to be rescued. I was not waiting for someone to feel sorry for me. I was preparing. Patience isn't the same as waiting. I need to be clear about that. Patience is continuing to prepare when the world has decided you're finished. He looked at the room. You're not finished, he said. None of you are. The room was still for a moment. Then Carl started enthusiastically, not the way someone leads applause at a performance, just steadily. From his chair near the door, in the spot he had stood for 38 years, Carl Booker clapped his hands together in a slow and certain rhythm, and one by one, other people joined. After the gathering, when the folding chairs were being stacked and the room was emptying out, Naomi found Elijah standing near the window on the east side of the lobby. She stood beside him. They'd had 4 months of something, not reconciliation, something building toward something. Conversations that were sometimes easy, sometimes not. A Sunday dinner that lasted 4 hours because they kept finding new things that also needed to be said. It was slow. It was honest. Mom called me, Naomi said. He looked at her. Last week, she saw the verdict on the news. Naomi was quiet for a moment. She didn't say much. She said she was glad it worked out. Elijah turned back to the window. That's something, he said. It's not enough. No, he agreed, but it's something. Naomi looked out the window too. I spent a lot of years being angry at you, she said, and then I found out it was directed at the wrong person, and I didn't know what to do with it. Where did it go? She thought about it. Into work, she said. Into cases. Into fighting for people who were told the system worked when it didn't. She paused. I think I was always fighting for you. I just didn't know it was you I was fighting for. He looked at her. Something moved through his face, not the controlled stillness he'd maintained through everything. Something less defended than that. Something that had been behind the control for a long time and had finally found the right moment to show itself. Your mother would not like hearing me say this, he said, but you turned out exactly the way I hoped. Naomi looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back out the window. Outside, the city moved through its evening in the way cities do, continuous and indifferent to any single story within it. I need more time, she said, to work through all of it. I want you to know that I'm not there yet. I know, he said, but I'm going to keep showing up, she said. That's what I can tell you right now. I'm going to keep showing up. That's enough, he said. That's more than enough. They stood at the not touching, not performing anything for anyone. Just dancing in the same space, which was itself a thing that had seemed impossible not long ago, and was now simply true. Camille found Carl near the door as the last of the guests were leaving. He was standing in the spot he'd stood for 38 years, not on duty. Just standing there in his regular clothes, watching the room empty out. She stopped beside him. He thought about it. I've been asking myself something for 20 years, he said. Whether I should have done more, earlier. Whether there was a moment where I could have changed something and I missed it. She waited. I don't think I missed it, he said. I think the moment wasn't ready until it was ready, and then it was ready, and we moved. She looked at the room, at the marble floor, at the lobby that had once gone silent when a man in a wet coat walked through those doors, and that was now something different from what it had been. She asked, now that you don't have to keep things anymore. Carl looked around the lobby. Sleep, he said. Then, after a moment, and maybe travel somewhere I've never been. I've been in this building so long I've forgotten there are other places. She laughed. He smiled. A real one. She left before he did, walked out through the front doors into the cool evening, stood on the sidewalk for but a moment. She thought about the night it started, the rain, the man in the wet coat, the piece of paper in the trash can, and the decision to reach in and pull it out. She had not known what she was reaching into. You never do. That was the thing she understood now that she hadn't understood then. You can't see what a thing is going to become when you first pick it up. You can only decide whether it's worth holding. She walked to her car. Elijah left the hotel at 9 that night. He walked, not because he had to. He had a place to sleep now, an apartment 4 blocks east, 2nd floor, a window that looked out over a narrow street where, in the mornings, the light came in at an angle that was the closest thing to beautiful he'd encountered since his release. But he walked anyway, because 35 years of walking had made it the thing that settled his thinking when nothing else would. He went south through the streets he knew from the outside. past the corner where the newspaper man worked, past the alley off Clement. He stopped at the mouth of the alley, looked to the inn. Someone else sells his cardboard now. Someone else's shelter. He stood there for a moment, not with grief exactly, but with the kind of recognition you feel when you see clearly where you've been. Then he turned and walked north, back up toward the hotel, back toward the lit windows visible at the end of the block. He stopped the sidewalk across street. He stood there and looked up at the building, not the way he'd looked at it for 18 years from this same approximate position. That had been the look of a man measuring the distance between where he was and where he should be. This was different. This was a man who had closed the distance, who stood on this sidewalk now not as the outside of something, but as part of it, who could, quote, walk through those doors tomorrow morning if he wanted to, and the doors would open because they were his doors. He stood there long enough to let that be real. Then he put his hands in his pockets and walked home. For the first time in 35 years, he walked home. Not to a doorway, not to a shelter, not to a corner where he'd learned to be invisible. Home. And the city, which had tried for 35 years to convince him he didn't exist, continued its nighttime business around him, indifferent as always. And for once that indifference felt exactly right, because he wasn't walking through it anymore as a man who needed the city to see him. He was walking through it as a man who finally saw himself.